Hey everyone, so today's video is going to be about how to draw clouds with pen. So if you're someone who's tried to draw clouds, but maybe they come out a little bit too cartoony, I'm going to show you a number of different techniques that you can use to make your clouds look more realistic and more interesting. Okay, so my first tip is a lot of times when we draw clouds, what you want to be focusing on is actually the negative space, which is the space around the cloud, not the cloud itself. And that's because a lot of times visually clouds are white, right? So we're not going to actually sometimes draw the cloud as much. We're going to be drawing the space around the cloud to show that that's the sky that's darker. Okay, so the second thing is that you want to look at the light and shadow that's in clouds, right? So when there's lights, you can show that a lot of times by actually just leaving that area blank and not drawing over it. And then when there's shadow, you're going to be going over that with your pen. Okay, so as you can see right here, what I'm doing, I'm kind of using a sort of a scribbly mark to go over those dark areas. So the third tip that I have for you is to think about mood, and you're going to use your lines to convey the mood. So what I mean by that is that let's say you want a whimsical effect, right? So lines like this will give you a more whimsical effect, and other lines might give different types of effects. So let's go through some different lines that you can use to show different effects. So over here, again, this is sort of the same drawing, but I'm doing a bunch of different things on the same drawing. So you can use lines similar to kind of that whimsical effect that you're getting in the previous one, but this kind of looks a little bit maybe more like to show like a gust of wind, right? So you can give your line some energy by having them be a little bit longer, a little bit faster. That's different than the other lines that are a little bit shorter. So even your line speed and how long the lines are can give different effects just through your lines and your line quality. Now you see here that you can still create going back to the idea of like light and shadow, you can still create a sense of light and shadow by layering your lines and making some areas a little bit darker. So if you have a cloud and maybe the underneath side of the cloud is a little bit darker, you can still convey that with your lines. And if you add things like, say, swirls, obviously that's getting more stylized. Like you don't usually look up at the cloud and see swirls, although you can give a sense of like a brooding storm or something like that, or wind through swirling lines. So these are the kinds of things that I want you to think about when you do your drawings of a cloud, is like, what are your lines actually conveying? And I know it's a weird thing to kind of like start thinking about, like, what are your lines conveying? But this is what's going to sort of help you take your drawing, I think, to the next level by thinking about some of these things with what you can do just with your lines. So again, think about how someone might go about describing clouds, like whether it's ominous, ethereal, moody, and think about how you can use your lines to convey that mood. So here, this is obviously more high contrast than the first few that I demonstrated. And just notice like the different type of line quality that I'm using, and just try and experiment some of those different line marks and see kind of like what sort of different moods you can create just through your lines. And this one too is a good example of using the negative space to show the clouds, right? So it's not so much that you're often drawing, when you're drawing clouds, you're not always drawing the clouds themselves, but you're helping to show the space around the clouds. And the clouds themselves are more ephemeral, and they look like they're kind of more like activated and moving through the space than if they were, let's say you had an outline around your cloud, it would make it look very kind of stuck there, and it wouldn't look as accurate and realistic as you might want it to. If you've learned something new in this video, please subscribe and hit the like button. And also please leave a comment. That helps the video go out to a lot more people. So coming up, I'm going to do an entire drawing from a landscape. But first, let's go over the takeaways from this section. So we've got the 3 tips are negative space, focusing on the negative space. The second is focusing on your light and shadow. And then your third takeaway is getting different types of moods through your line quality, whether that's ominous, whimsical, ethereal, whatever the mood that you're going for, you want to think about the lines that you can use to create that effect. Okay, so let's apply the things that we've talked about in an actual landscape drawing. And so I wanted to go over a bunch of different types of actual marks that you can make. I did that a little bit before in the first section, but let's go over a few different types of marks that you might want to use when you're drawing in a landscape. So you first see that I'm kind of using this sort of like scrubby circular scribble mark. So that's one different mark. Now I'm using sort of like short circular lines. So you want to, when you're drawing, play around with different marks and see the different types of effects that you can achieve. A quick note about any time that you do a landscape drawing is that you have your horizon line, right? So your horizon line divides the picture into basically like the sky and then the ground, right? And it's, you know, usually it's in the lower part or the top part, right? You usually generally don't want to have your horizon line right in the center because that will make kind of for a boring composition. So think about though where you put your horizon line, because that's going to kind of determine like how much the clouds are the focal point. So the lower the horizon line is typically means that the more, you know, clouds you're going to be drawing. So in this one, you know, I wanted to select a photograph that had clouds as kind of an important feature of the image, right? So that's just something to think about whenever you're drawing, is the horizon line. So it's not usually how we think about lines, but I want you to start thinking about the line direction or the line quality that you have and what it's conveying. Like your lines are kind of talking in a way. I know that sounds weird, but they're conveying something, right? So anytime you have lines, like let's say right now, you know, they're going in these longer directions kind of around the image, and they sort of look a little bit like the light, right? So they give the sense of the light, whereas the ones that were at the bottom where they were like those darker clouds, they have that kind of more like of a scrubby look. So again, your lines are going to convey different things to the viewer. So you want to use your lines in such a way that it's conveying you what you want it to convey, whether it's, you know, a dramatic scene or something whimsical or something ominous or whatever the, you know, the words that you kind of come up with for your image that you think are relevant to whatever you're drawing. That's kind of a way to start thinking about your image. And in any drawing that you do, I think it's always important to think about contrast, which contrast again is just, you know, having variations between very dark and very light. And, you know, if you want to have a high contrast drawing, that's going to give a little bit more of a dramatic effect. So these are just some general things that I think are always good to think about in your drawings. And I'm using micron pens in this. I'll put a link in the description of where you can get these. So these are my favorite pens. They are archival. They work really well. You can get them in a lot of different sizes. So you can get really different effects based on whether you're using, say, like a 005, which is the really fine tip, or this was like with a 02 and a 05, which, you know, worked well for this one because I wanted to go a little bit quicker in this drawing. So the 05 is a little bit of a thicker tip pen, and then, you know, 005 and everything in between, you can get different effects. So that's another thing I wanted just to mention. On the margin, I'm showing you a bunch of different lines that I'm using throughout this drawing. So again, you can get the sense of all the different types of marks that you can make, even in just one drawing, and have it still be pretty cohesive. So, so let me know in the comments what you thought of this and the other drawing that I made in this video. And if you'd like to see other tutorials on different subject matter, let me know in the comments that as well. So thank you again for joining. Please subscribe, and I will see you next time.